The reason that it's so hard to love yourself is because you know you, right? Like, you know this person really could be doing so much better, and they kind of choose not to. Even if the self-loathing is justified, is it productive? When you look at your thoughts of self-loathing, who is doing the looking? Because the self-loathing is inside the mind, which is the object that you are observing. I spent so much time in my own head, and the more time I spend in my head, what do you think happens? Does the loathing get better? No, it gets worse. Is self-love really the answer? I just need to learn to be happy by myself, be happy by myself, be happy alone, be happy alone, be happy alone. And then, are you okay, bro? Yes, I just need to learn to be happy by myself first. Seems like when it comes to the topic of loneliness and dating, you always see self-love being brought up. Love yourself first before getting into a relationship. If you don't love yourself, then how can you love others? I understand the rationale. If you're miserable and get into a relationship, it won't solve your problems. Instead, it'll just spread your misery to your partner. It'll drain them constantly, give you validation and support without receiving anything in return. However, when I see the topic of self-love online, it feels like you must be an enlightened monk who has achieved self-actualization before you even enter the dating market. Just taking a walk outside, you'll meet tons of people who are conventionally unattractive or have horrible character who are in relationships. It could be loving or abusive. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they are in one despite not having looks max or being a kind person. My conclusion from all of this is that dating, just like many things in life, boils down to a game of luck. Your attempts to gain wealth, status, and improve your looks and skills are all to increase your luck of finding someone attractive, but that outcome will never be guaranteed. Some people will lose. I'm not implying a black-pilled rhetoric that you shouldn't work on yourself, but it seems like everyone tells you you must be comfortable alone, and I want to prepare myself for that life path. I just don't understand. This isn't even about dating. Humans are inherently social creatures. How can you possibly feel content living through life without connections and people who love you for who you are? Friends, family, community, children. Okay, so we're going to talk about... So the team found a clip that I want to show you guys. This is hilarious.
The new norm of capacity, right?
Yeah,
so now I just have 10 pounds I carry.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
How did you get down to just one pile of papers?
So much love for yourself. It starts with
Wait, that was actually hilarious.
Yeah.
With so much love for yourself. Like, I love that is not the answer. And that's what we say to ourselves. And that doesn't help us. This is me thinking self-love is not the answer.
It helps in the sense of like, it frees up, it allows you to actually do things. Like, I feel like when we are so angry and mean to ourselves, we get really paralyzed. Right. So that like perfectionism of like, I'm never going to be exactly what I need to be because I'm so messed up is like, then I'm not going to try. Right. So like, I mean, tongue in cheek, like,
that's actually
I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can start there.
Which is hilarious. Okay. So that's Dr. Michaela. If you guys don't know Dr. Michaela, she's awesome. She teaches us many things. She is an awesome complement to my perspective because she's one of these people that understands self-love, right? So she was like, oh my God, with so much self-love. And I was like, ha, 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 ha. That's hilarious. Because I don't get self-love. So let's dispense with a couple of things. Is self-love really the answer? Okay. So first thing is people will say, if you don't love yourself, how on earth can you love someone else? And I will say, so easily. It is so easy to love somebody else, right? Because other people are decent human beings. Other people are productive. Other people are kind. Other people have shit going on. So this is like the first thing that I don't get. I find that it is actually way easier to love somebody else than it is to love yourself. It's like you can be the worst human being on the planet, and if you see a kitten outside in the cold, you can love that kitten so easily. You can love your kids. You can love your spouse. Like, if you fall in love with someone, it is so easy to love other people. So this is the first thing that, like, I don't get that perspective. We're going to talk a little bit about how relationships with without self-love can be a problem. So we'll get to that. But, like, I think sometimes we forget that oftentimes you're the hardest person to love. And I think sometimes people who haven't felt this internal sense of self-loathing, like, don't understand this, right? So a lot of people will be out there and be like, learn to love yourself first, bruh, and then you can love someone else. And I think there's like two kinds of people. There's people who sort of needed to discover self-love, and then there's people who have self-loathing. And those aren't quite the same, right? There's some of us who are like, don't really know how to love ourselves, but we're somewhere in like the neutral, like somewhere around 0. And then you have to learn how to love yourself. And then there's those of us who self-loathe. Those of us who go to bed every night saying tomorrow will be different, and then waking up tomorrow and repeating the same fucking day over and over and over again. And then there's like people, like, the reason that it's so hard to love yourself is because you, right? Like, like, this person really could be doing so much better. And they kind of choose not to. Because many of us live lives of like not self-love, but like self-appeasement, where it's like, this thing that I'm waking up with today is really not having a great day. So I'm going to just, I don't know, I'm going to order a Philly cheesesteak with a side of fried rice, and I'm going to play Ruby's Resolve until I fix this artificial life on the internet instead of fixing my own. So this is where, like, I get it. I think that self-love is hard to do on your own. It's really something that I'm starting to sort of get it, but I still really don't. So first thing is when people say, look, it's hard to love you can't love other people unless you learn to love yourself. I don't think that's true. I think it's actually way easier to love other people. I think the other really scary thing is that self-love cannot be learned by you. It has to be taught. This is what's so scary. And there's so much data to back this up. Like, so this idea, right, of like being in a room trying to learn self-love is almost impossible to do. We'll give you guys a path at the end of this section. Like, so I'll share with y'all how you actually do this, but this is not how self-love is actually learned. You don't learn self-love by sitting in a room by yourself. The sad truth is that most human beings on the planet learn self-love through social conditioning. And there's tons of this. Doesn't mean that you can't do anything about it. But I hate this because sometimes I'm left in a situation where someone is like, how do I learn self-love? And then I look at all this pile of science, and we'll get to that in a second, and I'm like, look, learning self-love by yourself is hard. And then people hear that and they're like, well, looks like I'm fucked because there's a loneliness epidemic. No one cares about me. I'm socially isolated. And it's like, I'm not trying to tell you that you're screwed. We're going to tell y'all how to try to fix this problem. And I think there is a lot that you can do. But I hate to be the one to say that human beings are biologically made to be social creatures. And if we really look at the science behind self-love, it is something that is socially conditioned, just like many other things. So I don't know if you guys have heard of something called attachment theory. So this is a very, very prominent theory in psychology that talks about how human beings form relationships, especially, and how our relationships are determined by our earliest caregivers. So there are 3 kinds of attachment. There's secure attachment, which about 50% of the people on the planet have. There's anxious attachment, which we'll get to, where people are worried that other people don't like them. So even if you're in a relationship, you don't feel comfortable in that relationship. And then there's about 25% of people have anxious attachment. 20% of people have something called avoidant attachment. These are people who have learned that emotional bonds are scary things to be avoided at all costs. And so about 20% of people are avoidant, and they try to distance themselves. So then 5% of people have disorganized attachment. That's when people have very serious problems growing up. But there's a really good way to sort of understand these 3 forms of attachment. And I think about it in terms of sex and intimacy. So if you're securely attached, sex becomes an expression of emotional intimacy, right? So I feel a certain way about you. I'm deeply in love. I'm playful. I'm supportive. I feel supported. And so the sexual activity, the physical intimacy becomes a reflection of that. So sometimes sex is passionate. Sometimes it's playful. Sometimes it's a chore, which can be totally fine. And then there's anxiously attached people where sex becomes a hook for emotional intimacy. So these people will oftentimes engage in sexual activity to try to pull someone in emotionally. I'm going to have sex with you so that you don't abandon me. I'm going to have sex with you to make you happy. Please stay. I will do whatever you want. And then avoidant attachment people use sex as a barrier to emotional intimacy. This is just a purely physical thing. There's no feelings involved. once I bucket you into a sexual object and we're in a situationship and it's friends with benefits, then I don't have to deal with all these emotions. I don't want any of these emotions. I don't want any of this emotional connection. That kind of explains these 3 attachment styles, okay? We've done a ton of videos on attachment. So here's the scary thing. People who are securely attached tend to have the highest level of self-love. And secure attachment comes through our conditioning. It comes through the way that our parents raised us. So if your parents treat you with respect, if your parents treat you with unconditional love, right? Then you learn to love yourself. If I take a kid and I bully him every day, that child will internalize the way that human beings treat them. That's what we do. Like, that's like literally what we do. So if you take a little kid and you say, oh my God, this little baby is the second incarnation of Jesus Christ. Oh my God, my little baby is the best little baby in the world. And my little baby has the best poo-poos and the best smile and is just the smartest little baby. And anything that he does wrong is not wrong. It's your fault. If you raise a child like that, the child will receive that conditioning and they will become a raging narcissist. They will become incredibly entitled. If I abuse a child growing up, they will internalize a negative sense of self-worth. So the first thing we got to understand, for the majority of human beings on the planet, the way that they determine their self-love is through the way that they are treated. Now, this creates a huge problem because if you were mistreated growing up, if you don't love yourself very much, if you have some degree of self-loathing, which is usually deserved, let's be honest. And I say this as someone who had a lot of self-loathing towards myself. And basically, like, I think a lot of it was justified. You know, I think that's the kind of thing that really, like, frightens me as a psychiatrist. Like, sometimes I have patients who come into my office and they're like, I suck at life and I don't do this and I don't do this and I don't do this and I don't do this. And I'm kind of like, yeah, I see what you're saying, man. Like, I actually, like, I get what you're saying. Now, what Dr. Michaela said is really, really important because she says, even if that's true, having all that anger towards yourself doesn't help you, right? So this is where, like, there's a lot of subtlety here. But if we're talking about self-loathing and self-love, even if the self-loathing is justified, is it productive? And that's what's so hard about this, right? Because if you've been conditioned in this way, you can't just wake up one day and fix it. If y'all want to dive deep into the most important topics for our community, check out HG memberships. So the first thing to understand is that there needs to be no outcome from small talk. This is a Vasana too. Your mind is Vasanas all the way down. So the key thing about detachment is not that you don't have wants, it is that your wants do not control you. Membership grants you access to monthly streams as well as a back catalog of a year's worth of content, in addition to quests and so much more. If you're interested, you can sign up for $10 a month at HealthyGamerGG/memberships or click the link in the description below. Hope to see you there. So what do you do about it, right? So if we're in this situation where there's like a lot of self-loathing, maybe there's an absence of self-love, we're also stuck because self-love is largely something that we learn from other people. We can gain it by ourselves. There are certain things that we can do. So how do we gain it? And this is where, you know, I kind of say this as a psychiatrist, this is where like therapy works really well, right? So if you think about what therapy is, therapy around self-love is, first of all, observing your patterns. What is the way in which you talk to yourself? Critically kind of analyzing them. Does this actually help you or not? The problem with self-loathing is that when we listen to it, we don't actually improve our circumstances at all. And this is the really, really scary thing. I see this in so many patients where there comes this like critical point that it's really hard to dig yourself out of, which is if you have self-loathing to the point that you deserve not to be happy, then things become really hard. It's almost like this psychological event horizon where once you deserve to be unhappy, then it's like congruent. Does that make sense? Then it's like, oh, I deserve punishment. This is my punishment, right? Like I deserve this. So there's this weird kind of like martyrdom that I see in some patients who have a lot of self-loathing where it's like, okay, other people, you know, deserve way better than I do. I don't deserve a whole lot. I'm pathetic. I'm a loser. I screwed up, right? And then the moment that you stop deserving something, then you don't strive for it. Like you don't feel entitled to it. So whenever there's this spark that could turn into a fire of motivation and change, you tend to quash it down. And this is what really gets people in trouble in relationships. And when people say you have to learn self-love before you enter a relationship, I think this is what they're talking about. Because if you don't love yourself and you enter a relationship, you are entering a minefield. You're entering a war zone. Because if you don't love yourself, there are a couple of really terrible things that can happen. The first is you are vulnerable to abuse, manipulation, and being taken advantage of. And we see this all the time where oftentimes people with anxious attachment, people who are afraid that you're going to leave, will enter into relationships with people who are avoidantly attached. So the very person that you shouldn't be dating is exactly who you're attracted to. We also see this in cases of borderline personality disorder dates person with narcissistic personality disorder. So the person who thinks I'm the best thing on the planet ends up dating someone who will absolutely mold to them. So the reason people will say, okay, you have to learn self-love first is because if you don't have self-love and you enter into a relationship, if you're not careful, the person that you enter into the relationship with will be able to take so much advantage of you. Because when they mistreat you, you don't deserve to be treated well, right? So when people say this, they're not, I mean, I think it's challenging, but they're absolutely coming from a valid place, which is like, if you don't do this, people are going to take advantage of you. The other problem that happens when you don't have self-love and you enter into a relationship is, like we said, this is social conditioning. So you're looking for love and approval from someone else. And then this can be very subconscious, even on their part. They can discover that if I give you approval, you're happy. And if I don't give you approval, you'll do whatever I say. So I tend to see the worst relationships in terms of abusive, manipulation, being taken advantage of, where at least one partner does not understand self-love. Because if you don't understand self-love, then you don't understand boundaries, you don't understand what you truly deserve. And in some really messed up cases, they get these martyrdom complexes where they're like, okay, since I'm so pathetic, I might as well sacrifice myself for the sake of other people. And if I sacrifice, then I will be worth something, right? So they end up putting themselves last. They end up sacrificing a lot. Oftentimes they end up in relationships where people become dependent on their sacrifice. And then since I'm a pathetic person, at least I have some value. I have some identity. I have some ego over helping someone else. At least I'm worth something in that way, right? My sacrifice helps me feel worth something. And that too is something that's like evolutionarily like deeply baked in. We're generally speaking somewhat altruistic as human beings. We're community oriented, right? So we all value sacrifice. And even if you aren't worth anything in here, you can still be worth something by sacrificing for someone else. So how do you fix this, right? So if you're someone who struggles with self-love and you're trying to find it by yourself, I think there are a couple of things that you can do. So the first is focus a little bit on appeasement versus love. When you look at the way that you behave with yourself, how much of what you do is to appease yourself? Because people say like, oh my God, it's so hard to leave the house and I feel so uncomfortable. Like, think about if you loved yourself, how would you behave? And if you wanted to appease yourself, how would you behave? And a lot of times this is where kind of like tough love comes in. And I had an awesome patient who came up with the system. We were working on this. They were from the South too. And so we sort of bonded over that. And they came up with like what we called they made this up, so credit to them, the okay buddy system. And what the okay buddy system is, when we were trying to learn a different way of self-dialogue, they would say like, okay, buddy. Like they'd be like, okay, buddy, I understand you're feeling hard. Like, I understand that it's hard, buddy. Okay, it's okay, buddy. It's okay. I understand that it's tough, right? But you can handle it. It's okay, buddy. There's just this way that people talk to when there's a slightly younger person than you and they're struggling, right? When you're kind of like, okay, buddy, like you got this. Like, it's okay. It's okay. They treat themselves in that way. Does that make sense? But that's the way that they would talk to themselves, right? It's okay, buddy. Like, I know it's hard. I know it's tough. You got this, buddy. And so we have to learn how to change the way that we speak to ourselves and think a little bit about how much do you do that appeases you, that appeases the part of you that's a little bit whiny and a little bit too tired. We don't really push ourselves. And I think a lot of times people have difficulty with self-love because they think that it is like, it's kindness, absolutely, but it isn't appeasement, right? So when I like love my kids, I don't spoil them all the time. Like sometimes it's spoiling, sometimes it's appeasement, and sometimes it's like, okay, buddy, I know this is hard, but we got to learn. We got to push ourselves. I know it's hard right now. I know it is difficult. So what really confuses people is we're really good at beating ourselves up and punishing ourselves and being still and kind of we'll get calcified, but we don't really like love love ourselves enough to do ourselves favors, even if they're hard. We're going to do the dishes tonight. We're going to go ahead and set up something. We're going to cook a healthy meal for ourselves. We don't take care of ourselves. So I oftentimes find that, this is a good place to start. A second thing that's really tricky is that, like we said, social conditioning is really important. And now we have to talk about what makes social interaction hard. And I find that people who struggle with self-love and have self-loathing do a lot of negotiating against themselves. So when I'm sitting in my office and I'm talking to someone, I look for this, which is anytime there's a social interaction, they will negotiate against themselves. So I met a group of people, they invited me to a thing, and instead of going to the thing, I tell myself, oh, they just invited me out of politeness. I'm not actually letting them dictate to me how they feel about me. I'm inventing it in my head, and I'll do them a favor by not going. They just invited me out of politeness because I was there. You're not even giving them the chance to actually like you. So there's a lot of ambiguous social stimuli that get warped by your self-loathing. So to really pay attention to how people treat you instead of making assumptions about what they're thinking and what they're feeling. If people don't like you, they will let you know in any manner of reasons, right? Sometimes they'll tell you explicitly. Sometimes they'll leave you on red for 4 weeks. But for those of us that know this, because sometimes we leave people on red for 4 weeks, and this is what's really fucked, right? Sometimes the reason you leave people on red is not because you dislike them, but because you like them, because they sent you a really meaningful message and they deserve a really meaningful response, but you just didn't have the time for it right now and you were thinking about what to say. And it's so important because you do care about this person, right? It's kind of weird. So watch out for the times where in a social interaction, they're behaving a particular way, and then you're negotiating against yourself. You're twisting their actual actions, their invitations, whatever, into being negative. The last thing that we're going to talk about is I did say that this is possible. To learn self-love entirely on your own is possible, but I would say it is very difficult. So this is where, in my case, where basically meditation works really well at this kind of stuff. And some of the meditations that I teach, there's a lot of the teachings that are in the Ashtavakra Gita. So it's a text on Advaita Vedanta that sort of talks about a couple of different things, but really it's leaning at one thing. And some of the things in the Ashtavakra Gita talk about, okay, so where is your self-loathing? Where is the self-love? And it doesn't ask those specific questions, but that's what it's leading into. And this is kind of like a hard thing to understand. If you guys want to do it on your own, this is a way that works, but it is very hard to do. It's way easier to get socialized by other human beings, but here's how to do it. So if you look at self-loathing or self-love, where do the self-loathing and where do the self-love exist? I know this sounds kind of weird. They actually exist outside of you. And here's what I mean by that. So there's the outside world, okay? I can see balloons behind me. I can perceive things, right? So there's me as the perceiver, and then there are the objects of my perception. Right now, y'all are perceiving a dude talking on the internet. So that I am not you, right? I am outside of you because you can perceive me. So here's the really wild thing. Your thoughts, your emotions, your opinions of yourself are technically outside of you because you can observe them, right? So when you look at your thoughts of self-loathing, who is doing the looking? Because the self-loathing is inside the mind, which is the object that you are observing. It's kind of weird. I know. So I was trying to explain this to my kid the other day, where I said to her, I'm going to teach you a little secret. So she was having trouble with her sister, and they were getting into a fight. And I think the reason she was getting into a fight is because she hadn't slept well. She hadn't eaten properly. And we were explaining that to her. And I was like, so how do you feel right now? And she's like, well, this. And I was like, have you slept well? Are you hungry? We ate something. We had a little chat. And I was like, how do you feel now? How is it dealing with your sister? And it's way easier. So I told her, I was like, hey, I'm going to let you in on a little secret that very few people know. Your body and your mind are part of your environment. They are the environment that you inhabit more so than any physical object inside of you. I want y'all to really think about this. Your most immediate environment is your mind, right? Because that is the circumstances in which you live. So if you look at someone who has self-love and look at someone who doesn't have self-love, how is their mind different? It's very different. The way that their mind responds to them being taken advantage of is like night and day. And then the way that you deal with that, I know this is getting complicated, but hear me out. When my mind tells me this is not okay, I respond to my mind telling me. When my mind tells me that this is okay, it's okay for people to mistreat me, I respond to that. And then my work is sometimes overcoming what the mind tells me to do. But if I am overcoming the mind, that means that the mind is not technically part of me. There's an object that is outside of me. So I want to show you all something. This is a great clip.
Right. So one of the interesting things is I do think that if you look at it from like a clinical perspective, there is a bad way for your mind to function and there is a good way for your mind to function. That what you perceive as yourself to be is actually a pile of like micro traumas that have built up into something that I would call ego or a humcod. And I think that's the big missing step. So a lot of this, like finding authenticity, is about actually getting rid of your ego. And it's interesting because Joe keeps on using the word love. I don't know what that word means. Right. So I'm sure we're talking about the same thing, but that language has never made, like the concept of self-love. If you ask me today, do I love myself? I don't know what that means. I just am. You know, I don't have I would even say like the goal is to not even have a relationship with yourself.
Does this make sense,
Because the moment that you have a relationship with yourself, a relationship is between two things. And my path to self-acceptance, I wouldn't even call it self-acceptance because that means that someone is doing the accepting and something is being accepted. And that's actually duality. That's division. That's not the real self. That's a very subtle form of ego, right? And I don't know if that makes sense, so we can get into that, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense to y'all, but like this is like very hard, right? And I think Joe absolutely gets it. If you guys have seen that podcast, it's Joe and Charlie Hudson. Joe Hudson and Charlie Houpert. But so you can do this. This is doable. You can sit in your room and you can grind out self-love, but it's like very hard. And I mean, in my case, it took like years of practice, like dedicated practice of grinding every single day to like learn this stuff. So I would not recommend it. I think it's better to find social people, don't negotiate against yourself. Understand that if you want to learn self-love, unfortunately, other human beings are the fastest way to learn self-love. And if none of that works, if y'all are committed to doing it by yourself at home alone, I don't think it's like talk about things that make you feel good about yourself or maybe do something nice for yourself. I'm not saying that advice is bad, but I think the real way to do it is like actually through observing that really what you are. So you can observe your thoughts, you can observe your emotions, you can have self-loathing towards yourself, but even self-loathing towards yourself is an emotion. It is a thought. It is an idea of who you are. And you can watch all of that. Okay, so let me ask y'all, I'm going to leave y'all with a really important question. This question is enough. Is the part of you that sees how much you hate yourself, does that part of you hate yourself? When you see the self-hatred, here's you hating on you. When you look at this from the outside, is this thing over here that is looking at the self-hatred, that it's not, here's you judging you, here's you watching you judging you. Does that part of you hate you? And that's why they use a really beautiful word that has lost, we don't use it anymore in the West. They say to abide in yourself, to live within that awareness, to just sit in the place that watches you loathing yourself. Because I don't know if this makes sense. When you are in the self-loathing, you are over here and you hate that person. That person's an asshole. The hatred is right here. You feel the hatred over here and you're looking at yourself over here. But the hatred is here. The hatred is a part of you. You can even step one step further back and you can look at yourself hating yourself. And that part, does that part hate you? First, answer that question. Secondly, abide within that space. So a lot of people say, what do I do? And now I'm going to explain to y'all how meditation changes you. So remember that your mind is the environment that conditions you. If I surround myself with red pill manosphere stuff, if I surround myself with pink pill feminism, whatever, radical feminism, misandry, whatever, right? If I surround myself with a particular kind of video game or a particular community, whatever my mind happens in my mind is the environment that I live in. And the really interesting thing, it doesn't matter. Whatever happens in my mind will only get radicalized over time. And I know this sounds really weird. I know I'm pulling a lot of weird things, but I'm going to try to explain it. So I'll give you all a really simple example of your mind's job is to radicalize you towards black or white. That is how the mind functions. Give you an example. Later today, I'm going to go to the grocery store and I'm going to go to the peanut butter aisle because we need peanut butter. I'm going to look at all of these peanut butters and I'm going to not know, I don't know which peanut butter I want. When I walk into the aisle, I don't know which peanut butter I want. And 60 seconds later, I will pick one. I did not know, and then my mind does something, and then I arrive at a decision. So my mind was considering all of the possibilities, and then over time, as I turn thoughts over in my head, I'm radicalizing myself towards a decision. I'm ending up with a decision where at the very beginning, I had none. So this is what's really weird. If you spend time in your own thoughts, you will get radicalized. Right? So if you guys have done this, right? So we're talking about self-loathing. I spent so much time in my own head. And the more time I spend in my head, what do you think happens? Does the loathing get better? No, it gets worse. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse, even to the point where if other people are turning to me and saying, hey, oh, look, we think you're great. What does my mind do? It says they're just saying that to be nice. I'm negotiating against myself. I'm not even listening to what they say. So the biggest problem that most of us have is that we spend too much time in our own heads. Now, a lot of people will say the way to get out of your own head is to go and touch grass, which is absolutely one method. But I don't know if this makes sense. Here's your head. You can go touch grass over here, or you can abide in the self over here. You can go in the opposite direction. And you can look at your mind and you can say, wow, my mind is really having a tough time today. And the more that you sit over here, if you just spend time over here, that is the environment that you spend time in. And then over time, that part of you will grow. And that's how you transcend the concept of self-love. Once you realize, okay, this is just a human instrument. Today, Alok doesn't love himself, not that big of a deal. I'm just sitting here watching. So to abide in the self. Does the part of you that observes your self-loathing, does that part actually have any self-loathing? And if the answer is no, just hang out there. If the answer is yes, try to go one step further back. I love this. The misery trumpet is playing. Absolutely, right? So you can watch, you can be the one playing the misery trumpet, or you can be listening to the music. It's hard though, y'all. I'm not kidding. It's like really hard. It's so much easier to simply be loved by someone else. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.